This is Motorsport Radio. 1, 2. Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Motorsport Radio show, Motorsport Talks. And of course, this one is very, very special because not only do we have the lovely Mike Seabourne, who I'm going to interview and probably scare away, but we have Nick Connor from the Formula One show, which is very special indeed. And as well, we've got Andy Lloyd joining us on the panel. But let's invite our guest by giving him the usual treatment from Motorsport Radio. And I'll start off with Mike. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
So, hi, I'm Mike Seabourne. I'm a club racer. I race in the classic touring car racing club Jaguar Challenge, which is a sort of slightly balmy series for Jaguars of all ages. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now.
Yeah, and you say Jags of all ages, but it's not the Jags that you'd expect to race, is it? Like the XK120s and the XKSSs. It's what Jags are racing?
So this is there are historic and classic series for the cars that are actually worth something. This series is more for the cars that aren't. And it was sort of born out of the times when you could pick up an XJS from a scrapyard for 500 quid and take it racing very easily. And at the time, that made for a very competent race car. And over the years, it's evolved to the point now where we've got supercharged 500 to 600 horsepower machines, and it's all a bit mad, really.
Yes. What car are you driving for this season then?
So I've changed car over the off season. Most of the images flashing over the screen now are of my lovely old XJ40. Which I actually was the championship winner with last year. And that car was terrific. It was notorious within the series for having been in several sets of hands, all of whom drove it about 150%, quite often into things. It had been on its roof at least 2 or 3 times. It was, a really well-known car. And I was very lucky to be its custodian and take it to a championship win last year. But I wanted to move up the grid slightly, so I've changed into an XJS for this year coming, which I bought one that had been crashed because, why would you bother to buy something that's not going to give you a load of grief, when you can have an absolute pain in the bum for a while. And I've been screwing that together in my shed over the off season.
So XJS, I'm guessing 4-litre V8, not the 6-litre V12.
Not the 6-litre V12. I would love a V12, but they are a nightmare to keep going. From what I've seen from the other guys, that they can make terrific power. That they can be turned into a 500 plus horsepower car, but they will go wrong all the time from what I've seen for the rest of the grid. So mine's a 4-litre. It's a straight 6, 4-litre AJ16 straight 6, which should be good for in the region of 300 horsepower.
More than enough on the wet Donington track then.
More than enough for the dry when the suspension's 40 years old.
Yeah, so obviously this is not what people would obviously expect as a racing series, as a way of starting. So why don't you tell the listeners, how did you start into motorsport and what was your path to get to racing beat up old Jags at 100 mile an hour?
So I started karting when I was a kid. I was fascinated by cars and wanted to be a racing driver, as most kids do. So I had a go at karting and I found that I was actually reasonably good at it. I won a few rental karting championships. Never had the money to go any further as a kid, so I had to sort of leave it be. Went away, found myself work, and then found myself with enough money in my back pocket to contemplate going racing. And would you believe it was actually budget that sent me the way of the Jaguars, because my old XJ40 that I won the championship in cost me £3,000. And this XJS, granted a little bit bent out of shape, but it cost me £4,000. That's why I ended up with Jaguars. I didn't want to go and race some absolute Titanic-looking behemoth around Brands Hatch, but it was the fastest, hilarious, most mental, cheap race car that I could find, which is what put me in this series.
Fair enough. And what would you say has been your biggest achievement to date? So, like, from all your racing series that you raced in, what would you say is your biggest, the one you look back on now and go, I'm proud I did that?
Well, I should probably say winning the title last year, but we had a bit of a depleted series. The thing you come to learn about club racing is that it's absolutely embroiled in politics. It's like Gossip Girl. It's ridiculous. And so our series was surrounded by politics last year, and it led to us not having grids the sizes that we should have done. So I did win the championship, but it didn't come easily. It never does. But it wouldn't be my proudest achievement. Quite frankly, putting the XJS together has really tested my mettle. I actually got it finished to the state that I could take it out on track last week, and I put it away without needing to do anything else on it that evening. And I finished work, went home, and went straight into the garage. And I was like, oh, hang on. Oh, I don't need to do this anymore, because that had been my routine for weeks. It had been finish work, get in the garage, get the hammers out. It's really tested my mettle getting that car together, and it's not done yet, but it's looking like it's really getting there now.
Okay, and obviously that being your greatest achievement, when do you look to go out and test to see if what you've done is worthwhile?
Well, I think so. I don't want to get ahead of myself now, because I could definitely set myself up to fail. But this XJS actually isn't one of the most modified cars on the grids. I won from a fairly low class in the saloon because it's well out of date in terms of its equipment, and it's not militarized in the way that some of the grid was. And this XJS is much the same. So I'm racing in the same class as I was last year, but with a car that's about 200 kilos lighter, and I think probably makes about 20 or 30 more horsepower. So in theory, as long as I screwed it together properly, it should bring a title again. But, I could set myself up to fail there.
Okay, so you say about different classes. Are you able to talk sort of our listeners through the class system a little bit to help them understand a bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Jaguar Challenge, or the JEC Saloons and GT series as it was, as I say, we've had a bit of a political situation, and we've changed organising club over the off-season, but the series is the same in spirit. It's got 4 classes, and they range from A through to D. Class A is for cars that you pretty much drag, I was going to say off the road, but most of our cars, it's out of a scrapyard or out of a field, wherever they've been sat for the last 20 years. You put a roll cage in them and the mandatory safety equipment, and you take them racing, and that makes for genuinely cheap racing. You can pick up these old Jags for 1,500 quid for a really good one. And then that runs through to Class D, which is where the monsters hide. Class D is, I think the Jaguar Racing Class D is one of the most incredible, entertaining series or classes in club racing, because that's for exclusively supercharged cars, V12s or straight sixes. But once you've got a straight six in Class D, you can do pretty much anything, and that they tend to be 400 horsepower, flame spitting, incredible bits of kit. It's that's where the monsters hide, Class D.
Yeah, I must say, I watched a few races last year, and I was just amazed, especially by the XJRs they had there. I was thinking, well, who in their right mind would go racing with an XJR? Like, it weighs about 2.5 tons, but yeah, it was an amazing series. It was brilliant. So I advise you to go watch that. Who would you say is your main inspiration to go racing?
Well, would you believe, growing up, I didn't really have one. I always followed motorsport, but I didn't have a particular driver I thought, I want to be like him. It wouldn't have been until the likes of Jack Goff and Ash Sutton turned up in British touring cars that I really found myself looking at someone's style and thinking, yeah, that's a bit of me. Ash Sutton in particular, I could watch Ash drive all day and all night. He is absolutely inspirational, and the way most people would call it foolish, but the way that he can be in a completely safe position since he's been fighting for championships. He can be somewhere absolutely safe where he just needs to bring the car home, and the likes of Colin Turkington would just bring the car home. And Ash is still looking at that guy ahead, thinking, "Yeah, but I can have him. I'm gonna give it a go."
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Ash Sutton does make you really want to watch touring cars, and it makes you want to shout at the TV as well. It's like, stay there, don't do anything, don't do that. Oh God, he's done it. It's that sort of thing. So what advice would you give to someone? Say someone's listening at home and is sitting there thinking, you know what, I'd love to do that. I've got a XJ6 in my garage that I've been wanting to do up, like a little project. But you know what, I want to take it racing. So what advice would you give to someone who, say, wanted to take it racing in your championship?
In our championship, it's quite simple. You just got to give the lads a shout. Just look on the Facebook page, go through the Classic Touring Car Racing Club, give us a shout. We'll probably put you off, but if we don't, we'll invite you in. And that's the thing I didn't do when I started, was I didn't dip my toes into the different clubs and actually see the series. I didn't go out and watch that much club racing because it's all a bit hidden from the outside. It all exists in this sort of slightly foggy wilderness where it's difficult to make out what's what. If you just take the plunge, you just go, you know, there's 750 MC on my circuit this weekend, MSVR, BARC, BRSCC, go down and see what's on, get in the paddock, talk to the racers. And that sort of eliminates the fog, this sort of, what do I do to get started? It can all be a bit mysterious, and you just need to go and find out what the crack is, and the racers, all down to earth, they will talk you through it.
Yeah, definitely. And so how can people at home watch this championship? Like, go down, so like what circuits are you racing at and all this sort of stuff?
So obviously the ideal thing to do would be to go to the circuits. That's it's I think it's £10 for a ticket, and that'll get you into the Classic Touring Car Racing Club. But not just that, we're on the support bill for the British Truck Racing Championship. We're on the support bill for Britcar, and so you get, we've got 5 incredible categories just as in terms of the Classic Touring Car Racing Club, including for this year the Super Tourers, which, I mean, who doesn't want to watch that? That's going to be incredible. But then the series that we race with, Britcar, British Truck Racing, these are unmissable, and it's a tenner. It's a tenner, and you get a day's racing. But if you've got a valid reason, like you've got 2 broken legs and you can't make it down to the circuit, only under those circumstances is it forgivable. We're really lucky to have a live streamed live stream footage every event this year. So you can look it up on the BARC YouTube channel, and the quality of the coverage is cracking, really, really good. And Dave Goddard, who does our commentary, is a real genius. His attention to detail, his anecdotes absolutely bring the racing alive. So that's the way to follow it if you can't make it to the circuit.
Mike, I've got a question that I've always been interested in club racing. On this show, we typically talk about racing where teams bring a transporter and 6 guys in matching overalls jump out and fettle the car and put it out on the track, and the driver strolls up, jumps in and races. But that's not what club racing is about. When you go racing, what's your support network? Who do you bring along to support you and help you run the car over the course of a race weekend?
Well, I'm really fortunate. I've got a mechanic, I've got a driver coach, and I've got a fan club. Unfortunately, they're all my missus. She's she is my support network. She's brilliant. I do it all off my own back. It's blood, sweat, tears, snot, earwax, a lot to get the car out. And if there was a bit more money, then maybe you could run with a team. But I'm under no illusions that I'm going to be able to do this forever. So in order to make it last, you've got to do the work yourself, because paying a team to run every year is incredibly expensive. It's just not feasible for most of us, you know. But I'm sure that's what we choose. I'd love to just be able to get in the car and say, "Excuse me, mate, it understeers, sort it out." You know, that's the dream.
So you turn up with your car on a trailer. You put your awning up in the paddock, and that's your base for the weekend. Is that how it works for you?
Pretty much, yeah. I'm doing it a bit differently to most in that when I first started as a youth, I don't automatically have my trailer license, but I did have my HGV Category C through work. So I went out and bought an 18-ton lorry, which, you know, people see you turn up in it and they think that you are some established outfit, and then I jump out with the missus and we start throwing ratchet straps around, and people soon realise that actually no, it's just the easiest way for me to do it.
Between race weekends, if the car comes back in any way damaged, it's up to you to put it in the garage and sort it out, is it?
It is, yeah. And actually this year is the first year that I will have a garage. Previously, the only facilities I had was my 18-ton truck. So the car, yeah, that was storage for the car as well. It sits in a yard, and the race car would just sit in there, and that's how I stored it, because I didn't have any space or anything. So yeah, I used to do all my spanner work in the back of the truck, which isn't easy, and it's why the XJ40 always looked a bit battle scarred, because I never really had the facilities to properly get it together. But the XJS now is in the garage. I've actually got a garage. I've managed to get that sorted. So yeah, this is the first time that I've got some proper space to work in now.
And although you're fettling the car yourself, the car still has to go through quite strict scrutineering at each race weekend, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's, again, this is why I say to anyone who wanted to start racing to get involved with the clubs and to speak to the guys who are already doing it, because the MSV Blue Book to get a car eligible is about that thick when it's printed, and it's really daunting. But when you get your head into it and you find what the car, it's all about knowing what the scrutineer is going to look for when he sees the car, and there's very specific points on it that it needs to be that are critical in terms of its eligibility. And so if you talk to the guys who built the cars previously, or most importantly, or most easily, is to buy a car that's been campaigned before, because then you know that the basics will be right. If it's been raced for a long time, you'll probably find millions of bodges that you've got to undo, or at least that's my experience. But yeah, if it's previously been built, it makes things a lot easier. But once you know which bases you've got to cover, it's a lot more easy to understand where the scrutineer is going to go and look on the car, because going into it blind it would be daunting. There's a lot of eligibility criteria going into it, but you can break it down and make it easier for yourself.
Okay. Thanks very much. We don't spend enough time talking about club racing, and the racing can be fantastic, as you've already alluded to in those series, yet it probably doesn't get the spotlight that it deserves. So hopefully we can shed a little bit of light on it.
So just one final question. Obviously, looking through the photos, they all look like properly race-prepared cars. But what bits on them are sort of like? Do they have road tyres, road brakes, road gearbox, road suspension, or do they have specific parts from specific companies that you've got to fit?
Yeah, this is where which series you run in and which class system you run in can make all the difference, because what you tend to find with club racing is that if the regulations are free, someone is going to walk in with a wallet the size of my head and do what they want with them. Having a strictly subscribed set of regulations will make a huge difference, and that's what we've got with the Jaguars. We're lucky. Most of our equipment has to be from a road car. So the engine blocks, the engine cylinder heads have to be from a road car. The gearboxes, for the most part, have to be from a road car, but we can't run sequential gearboxes, which is where, you know, someone will go out and spend 10 grand on a sequential, and everyone else on the grid needs to spend 10 grand on a sequential to keep up. That's the way it goes with free regulations. So within our series, we've got fairly well controlled in that, yeah, most components are off the shelf from somewhere. You can climb the classes, and as I say, Class D, where the monsters lie, is a bit more free than most. But if you want to be like me, you want to run on a budget, any other class pretty much is doable with road car components.
So no slick tyres then, I'm guessing. It's just normal road, all-weather tyres.
Depends how many burnouts you've done. They soon end up slick. Yeah, we have to run treaded tyres. Toyo R888Rs are our control tyre, which are a sort of semi-slick compound.
And I'm guessing you pay a certain amount for a certain set of tyres. So like you say, like you pay, I don't know, £1,000 for 4 sets of tyres to last you a whole season, or is that like handed out when you turn up at the racetrack?
No, we have to pay for our own tyres. So that was something I was doing when I first started, was trying to make tyres last. And the thing with our control tyre, with the Toyo, is that it sort of works in the wet, but once it's been used a bit, it doesn't. And I had a fairly spectacular off at Donington on an old set that I was trying to last for a long time. And I soon learned that actually you just need to dig into your pocket every now and then and put yourself on some decent rubber.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the interview, Mike. I'm sure people at home will be tuning in to the All Elite Classic Jaguar racing, because from me personally, it's worth doing. And as you said, go down to your local track, support your local track. It's what we said last week as well. For a tenner, you get 9-10 hours of motor racing, and the variety is incredible. Obviously, subscribe our shows. We're on Audible, we're on Spotify. I think we've even got a TikTok now, so we're keeping up with the young people. And after this, we're going to dive into some endurance racing that happened in St. Petersburg, as in not Russia, America, St. Petersburg.
This is Motorsport Radio. Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.
So, hello, welcome back to Motorsport Radio, Motorsport Talks. This is Joshua talking now, and we're going to dive into the GTAmerica series, which has been running a few years. And, well, I discovered it just earlier on this month, and I thought I'll pay that a visit. And I think Andy can talk a bit more about it. But for the viewers at home, Andy, what is this series?
Well, I think, as we were talking about last week, that SRO, who organises GT World Challenge, America, Europe and Asia, Intercontinental GT Challenge, and numerous other series, British GT amongst them, as an organisation is very focused on the amateur driver. When Stefan Rattel started SRO Motorsports, he did it to encourage owners of, private owners of sports cars to take them racing. So he's always been very focused on the amateur driver who wants to compete with fellow amateurs who are all racing at a similar level. Now, the SRO has been a victim of its own success because it's provided such fantastic racing that it's encouraged professional drivers and manufacturers to come in and go GT3 racing. And the danger always was that the plucky amateur who's gone out and spent an awful lot of money on a really nice race car is going to feel a bit swallowed up and intimidated by a grid that largely consists of professional drivers. So a couple of years ago, Stefan Rattel started, and I think it was just based in America, they started a series. It was called GT Sports Club America. And it was effectively club racing for GT3 and GT4 cars. Now, obviously, the last couple of years have been upset with what's gone on with the pandemic, but last year they launched GTAmerica, powered by AWS, which is a sports car series primarily for amateur drivers. And it had, I think, about 20 odd cars on the grid for the final round of 2021. But going into 22, it's got a really good grid. I think there was something like 29 cars on the entry list. 11 in the senior class, which they don't call GT3, they call SRO3, because these are not necessarily the most recent and homologated GT3 cars. GT4 cars, and they also had a single GT2 entry as well. And the racing, as you said, Josh, was absolutely fantastic. Racing at St. Pete's around the twisty airfield circuit, there's 2 or 3 corners on that circuit that catch the unwary out if you're not careful. And the racing was really good. And I have to say, I enjoyed every second of it. I think one of the things that we were talking about was the Callaway Corvette that appeared, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second. But there were some really interesting cars out, and it was great to see proper amateur GT racing again on our screens.
So one of the questions I wanted to ask, Andy, and I think anyone who watched that series would like to know the same thing, was how were the outdated cars, such as the Audi R8, which actually won, and that's about 10 years old, and the Corvette did quite well as well, was able to beat modern Lamborghini Huracans, Ferrari 488s, and Mercedes AMGs. Is it BOP'd, or is it just...
They're very finely balanced to make sure that if you're taking an older car racing, that you're not wasting your time. So that's exactly what happens. I haven't seen the technical regs. I'm sure it's something to do with air restrictors, ride heights, ballast, the standard sort of things that you would BOP a car over. But it enables you to take older cars that wouldn't necessarily be up to speed with a brand new GT3 car and be competitive. And that's what we saw. And it was great to see that Callaway Corvette out. That finished, I think, racing in, I think it was ADAC GT Masters, the back end of last season. And it had been parked up, and they decided to ship it over to the States. It took a long time to get it shipped over. It made it in the nick of time. But what a fantastic car to see. The Callaway Corvette as a GT3 car was never homologated to race in the States because GM didn't want a rival Corvette racing. So it stayed very much in Europe, but great to see it out on the streets of St. Pete's.
Yeah, and the St. Petersburg circuit is an interesting one itself, because you've got, basically you're driving along the runway going into the first corner, and as we saw on both races, it was not the easiest corner to overtake cleanly on, should we say?
I had to be very careful on that, and I think some of the drivers have got a bit enthusiastic, so went in a bit too hot and found themselves in problems. But I always think that's a very interesting circuit, because on some of the turns you have got some runoff, on others you've got absolutely no runoff whatsoever, and a huge great concrete wall awaiting. And I think it was in race 1 where the leader came round and clearly sort of just bounced off the concrete barrier, managed to keep going. I think it was the Jason Daskalis car, I think.
Yeah, it was the Audi R8. He managed to sort of scuff all the tyres up, but managed to avoid everything else.
But managed to keep going. And it was absolutely fantastic to see. So I think it's a really good circuit. Of course, the weather's always fantastic, and it's always dry, and it looks beautiful. And at this time of year, when it's wet and dreary in the UK, to watch racing from a circuit like that in 80 plus degrees was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and we saw the Audi R8 GT2 taking part in there. He started quite way down the grid, but we saw the real difficulty the GT2 drivers have in basically getting the cars round the corners, because you could see it flying past all the GT4 machinery and into the GT3s. As soon as it hit the corner, the GT4s were actually repassing it.
It'll be really interesting to see what happens with GT2. GT2 was launched in 2019, primarily at the behest of Stefan Rattel, because he wanted to introduce a car that provided the excitement of a GT3 car, so all the grunt and more, without the finely tuned aero, where really a pro driver could really take advantage of it. So it's a GT2 is tons of power, tons of grip, mechanical grip, not a vast amount of aero. So amongst a well sorted out GT4 car with all the aero kind of done properly, they are going to struggle. But the problem that we should have had more GT2 cars on the grid in St. Pete's. I think it was unfair. I think that was the CJ Moses car, as I recall. And I think, I don't know that driver terribly well, but I think his experience is relatively limited, I think. And it would be good to see one or two more GT2 cars out just to kind of get a real sense of the pace of them. I saw the Audi Gt2 when it was launched at Goodwood in 2019, and it looked an absolutely spectacular car. And I thought, if we could see 7 or 8 of these in a race, that would really be a spectacle and a sound as well. Haven't quite seen that so far in GTAmerica, but I'm sure it's going to come.
Well, they've got the GT2, obviously, the GT2 World Challenge Europe that's launched last year, but will be coming back with a vengeance this year, we hope, with more competitors. Just the one last thing about this, and then we'll move on. What does the rest of the calendar look like for this series?
Actually, it's a really busy calendar. They started off at St. Pete's. They then go, well, they're racing at all the sort of the best circuits in America, really, with the exception of COTA. They go to Sonoma. Every weekend is 2 races. So St. Pete's, who just had, they go to Sonoma, VIR, Watkins Glen, Music City, which I believe is Nashville. Road America, Sebring, and then they finished the season off at Indianapolis. But just going back to Sebring, I don't know if you caught any of I think they called it Speed Tour, which was effectively Trans Am, and some historic racing from Sebring over the weekend. And that was absolutely incredible. Some of the cars out in that were brilliant, and it was kind of almost like an American version of the Goodwood members meeting. Just some fantastic racing. So it really was a feast of sports car racing and GT racing in particular from America over the weekend. Really good fun.
Yeah, and Connor, anything you want to add on the GTAmerica race series that we had?
Indeed, the series has been going very well from what I've been seeing so far, and Andy has managed to sing its praises. The one thing I think it's really missing at the minute, though, is major involvement from big teams and big drivers. As much as I enjoyed the racing at the weekend, there wasn't many names I recognised on that grid, and I think that'll be one of the things it needs to look at going forward. I know the budgets are a lot smaller than some of the other SRO series, but if it needs to have a stranglehold in America, you're going to have an audience for it, and to have an audience, you've got to have a fan club. I know it was mentioned about the CJ Moses GT2 car. They didn't quite have the race experience compared to some of the others, and that's probably a weak point of the series. Let's say that they are going to be having to look at if they do want to improve themselves. You can't bring in amateurs to drive your most powerful machinery, as it were, especially in a circuit like that.
I think
saying that though,
just to kind of jump in on that, Colin,
go on, Andy.
The regulations say you have to be a bronze driver. So
yes, what
you're typically getting there are American businessmen who have made some money, who want to go racing.
True.
So that's why you've got a grid of names that you probably wouldn't recognise unless you follow amateur racing. But I mean, George Kurtz was there in a Riley Motorsports Mercedes.
True. I think my point was I know we're not going to have the Caldarellis there for example, no. but I think I was more expecting, was there any Michael Keating level bronze drivers that you'd perhaps recognise from the more international scene. But no, I suppose you are right with Kurtz.
I think it's probably seen to be almost a feeder series for drivers who want to improve their racecraft before they go into something like GT World Challenge America, in a Pro-Am combination, or just to go out and have some fun with their mates in a GT3 car around St. Petersburg.
Fair shot.
Yeah, let us know what you think, guys. Obviously, like, subscribe, do all the things you do with our show. Let everyone know about it. But check it out on YouTube. It was really good to see. Obviously, it supported the IndyCar series that was there. It also had the Mazda series, which is just amazing. I loved it. Daytona, second round at St. Petersburg was, if anything, even better somehow. It was just great. And yeah, we will look to see. Obviously, I was rooting for that Callaway Corvette, but when he got taken out in the first corner, got a bit upset. You know, luckily it wasn't too damaged. But it was nice to see that Audi R8 that we hadn't seen in like decades come out of nowhere and win, which was nice to see. So we're going to move on to, obviously, we've got some news that we want to discuss. And I've been itching to discuss this because it's just broken yesterday. PMR Vauxhall has a crease in their driver lineup. In the fact we've got Michael Crease, yeah, wordplay. There'll be more wordplay coming in as well. It's great. Couldn't resist. Mike, obviously you follow touring cars. This is quite a big signing for PMR Vauxhall.
Yeah, it's a great signing. I don't think we've seen Creasy at his fastest yet, and hopefully it should be some good machinery for him to really show what he can do. And I mean, it's just great to have him on the grid because I don't know if I've ever seen a more sort of jovial, down-to-earth driver involved in top-tier motorsport. You know, he's a great character to have around, and as I say, I think there's more to come from him.
Yeah, and obviously, Connor, the PMR Vauxhall, we suspected it would be a Plato and Jackson lineup from the 2020 Touring Car Series that never happened. It's now not going to be Plato Jackson. But do you think it could be Plato Crease for the 2022 BTCC? Or do you reckon Plato, given the fact that he's nearly 100, maybe he should eventually step away from British touring cars?
Well, I think we had this discussion 2 weeks ago, Josh, when we were talking about our predicted lineups for the PMR season. It's great to have Creasy back in the sport, although that does suggest, at least in my books, that their second driver is going to be, let's say, the one paying the bills, as it were. So that might be another season of Jason Plato, and honestly, I would not bet against it, but there has to come a point, and I think last season proved more than anything that Plato is not the driver that we all imagined him to be before. So unless PMR is really just prepared to effectively have this as a learning year and develop the car in the background for a 2023 campaign, I can't see Plato as the way forward that they want to be going, especially if they want to continue to move up the grid as they were at least alluding to slightly last year, let's say.
I mean, Mike, obviously, because you race, you know what development means to get your car ready for the championship. Vauxhall are the only team yet to test their car because they've been keeping Crease behind the press, so we say, and no one knew about him until just now. Do you think this plan will really hold them against someone like BMW who's done? I mean, they just clocked another 100 miles of testing yesterday. We've got Team Hard that seem to be testing every day. You know, teams like that who seem to be going out every day and testing. Vauxhall aren't. Do you think that's going to hold them back?
It's an odd one, especially with the new powertrains. You would think that the teams would be doing everything they can to get absolutely every inch of mileage under those tyres. I'm not sure why they would not be seeking to do that. You know, even if it comes to just putting a driver in the car to get to that test, you know, who may not be in the ultimate race seat. You would think with the new powertrains, you'd think that they'd be out there. It's a bit of an odd one.
It is, yeah. It's a very odd one, and I mean, they they might have done testing and just no one has spotted them, but everyone else has been spotted. So it seems a bit of an odd one that in this day and age, no one has spotted a Vauxhall Astra driving around a racetrack somewhere that looks a bit like a PMR one. Another driver that's managed to pick up a seat is Tom Chilton, who signed for his 100th different BTCC team in his touring car years. He's obviously he's been racing touring cars since 2002. I wouldn't even dare to count how many teams he's been with. I think I counted up to 12 different teams, and I think that's about right. Connor, obviously, Accelerate, great season last season. Obviously, we've got this new powertrain, new era touring cars.
Yeah.
Do you think this is a good way to go with Chilton, who struggled, we've got to admit, with the BMWs last season?
Sure, but I think Chilton has proven that he's still a front-running competitor. I think we're all forgetting that 2018 season that he had with Team Shredded Wheat that was fantastic. I know he only won that one race in Knockhill, but his consistency throughout the season made him easily the best of the non-top two that season. And I think that is really sort of understated when you look at some of the teams he races for. He didn't get on last season, as you say, with the Sicily Motorsports car, but that's really got to be an exception. You look at his form, he's consistently getting poles every single year other than last year. Chilton has still got to be considered one of the top drivers in touring cars, and so I don't see why he shouldn't be, at least he should be considered a major part of Accelerate's movement up the grid. I will say they have been a little disappointing in losing perhaps some of the talent that I expected Accelerate to keep, but they still have Tom Ingram, and I think that is the major point, which is a lot of the focus will be on whether Tingram can fight for the challenge and fight for the title this year. And with someone like Chilton there supporting him in the background, I think that will be a very handy driver to have on board, along with Dan Lloyd, because both of them are very experienced drivers. And I think that's the other point, which is, as I'm sure Mike knows, the more you get on with the car, the more you learn about it. And Chilton knows, as you've mentioned, about every car on this grid. He's driven for every car on this grid. And as we're going into a new era, you want a driver who is quick to adapt, is quick to change, and who knows how to get the best out of a car in a very short amount of time. And I think Chilton will be a good benchmark, at least, for Ingram and the whole team to see how they're getting on compared to the field.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you were saying about Chilton's adaptability and all this. Last year, obviously, he was with rear-wheel drive BMW, his first rear-wheel drive team in his career. Would you, Mike, see his rear-wheel drive venture as a failure, or was it more to blame for Sicily having an undeveloped car?
Yeah, I feel a little bit for anyone who is driving a Sicily car, because to the untrained eye, it's the same shape as the West Surrey racing cars. So why isn't it just as fast? And that's not quite the way it works. So it can be very deceptive. And I think Adam Morgan's an unbelievable peddler as well, which isn't going to help, trying to make that car look good. Whether you call it a failure, I don't know. I mean, he went in and gave it a good crack, but I don't know if, especially as you say, in his first time giving it a go, if it was ever going to get up there. It's a big ask.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to stick with Sicily because obviously they've announced a new driver, and as it says on the screen, they've taken a gamble with George Gamble. And the reason I say this, because George Gamble is a massive rookie. He's come out of pretty much the lower motorsport ranks and has come out, and he's now driving a hybrid BMW in the British touring cars. Connor, I don't know if you know any more about George Gamble.
I think it's a little bit harsh on the guy to say that he's come from the lower ranks of racing. I think some of the Porsche guys would be a little bit upset with you on that side. But he was third in the Carrera Cup GP standings last year, and he's successfully been racing in the Porsche categories for some time now. He was laid off from racing at the back end of last year, which is why he's been available for these drives. But I'm fully confident he can make the step up to touring car racing. He's in even a couple of years back, he was winning the GT5 Challenge, which is which has a lot of crossover with how some of the front wheel touring cars are based nowadays. But yeah, it'll be a case of, say, how quickly we can adapt. George Gamble, for those who might be ringing in the back of their heads about the name, is the older brother of Tom Gamble, who was a former BIDC award winner. But we'll have to see how George gets on with this. He's still 25. He's still very young. He knows what he's doing. And I think he started to prove his success in the Porsches and in the lower leagues, as you say. So it'll be interesting to see how we can make this step across. And I've full confidence that he'll be front running within a couple of years. But for the time being, we'll just have to take it easy. Don't give too many high expectations to a rookie and all that.
I mean, to give him his credit, Sicily Motorsport have been helping him out. I mean, he has just recorded another 100 miles in the BMW 1 Series hybrid car, which they've been testing with, because obviously they don't want to test too much on the new 3 Series hybrid. So there is probably a little bit of difference between the two cars. But, if you, as a rookie coming into touring cars, if you can get these 100-mile runs coming in, surely that's going to put you in a decent stead when it comes to the first race, Mike.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to be in a position of being on my first ever British touring car grid, looking left and right and seeing the names that are on that grid at the moment. I don't know if anything can prepare you for that. Even if you're on top of a car, that's still it's a hell of a place to be. So, it'll help him. The test mileage will definitely help him. And I think the more accustomed you are to the car, the better you're able to cope with high pressure situations. But without ever having stepped on that grid before, it's definitely still a lot of pressure to do your first race in a British touring car, especially at the moment. I think we don't have a particularly slow crop of drivers at the moment. I think the British touring cars is not an easy place to be currently. But he's got a good pedigree, so I'm interested to see what he can do.
No, I mean, I think last year there were times when qualifying was top 15 cars were separated by about an 8/10 of a second. It's ridiculously competitive, and this season I don't think is going to be any different. I think if possible it will even be closer, because they've all started from scratch. These teams have obviously basically put these powertrains in cars that have already been racing in touring cars. So they're not new cars. So they know the cars really well. And I think this is just going to... And the driving list of people coming in and joining up on the list is just ridiculous. I mean, as I said, we've got Michael Crease, we've got John Chilton, we've got Shedden and that, who knows, Neil could join in and take on Plato. Neil versus Plato, Mark 100, It's that sort of thing.
You've been hyping that up for too many weeks now, Josh.
Well, I'm begging it to happen. I mean, it's a case of, as an empty Honda seat, you've got to put Neil in it for one last ride. Name it, the Plato versus Neil, one last fight, it's just perfect. But, as a rookie, as you're saying, on the grid and you're lining up with these names, and Team Dynamics, Team BMW, factory teams lining up. You're driving an independent, but sort of a factory car. And you've got to be thinking, wow, okay, it's got to be so daunting to sit in there. So let's see how he goes. BTCC also released some incredible news for fans. And that is the media day is back with fans on the 13th of April at possibly the best circuit to have a pre-season test. When you think of all the circuits in Britain, a pre-season test circuit as Thruxton, that is basically a car-killing circuit. I mean, Mike, I'm guessing you've driven around it a few times. What's your thoughts on this circuit?
Thruxton's just fabulous. You know, it's the worst kind of mechanical torture. It definitely is. I've never known a circuit harder on tyres. What Thruxton can do to a set of rubber is like nowhere else. But it's just a fabulous track. The bottom of the circuit through Goodwood and Church, and people wouldn't believe actually how blind that is in a racing car when you're sat low. Both of those corners, I mean, Goodwood just goes on forever, but you've got to spot the exit and commit to it about 10 minutes before you get there at 100 mile an hour. And Church, even in a rubbish old Jag like mine, that's 120 mile an hour blind apex. That's what racing's about. That's a proper test. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, these touring cars, you'll probably be doing 130 plus mile an hour through there. You know, they'll be getting up to 150 coming up to that final chicane. The only issue I have with this, and you can shout me down in a minute, Connor.
I will.
Right. Immediate day at Thruxton. Silverstone, for example, has lots of availability for lots of fans to see the whole circuit. Brands Hatch, same thing. You know, Donington Park, most of that circuit you can access. Thruxton, you can't. Thruxton is very limited on fans available tickets as well as seating area and viewing areas. So is this wise to have a launch day of such a huge season and such a huge championship at what is basically one of the lowest populated tracks, lowest populated races?
I think the point here is that while the media day is always a great excitement for a lot of fans, it is not the most well-attended event of the season for perhaps obvious reasons. You know, the race weekends are more exciting. Thruxton provides as many fan seats as it needs to provide, I think is the best way to put this. If you are a dedicated BTCC fan and you want to go see racing, absolutely go along to Thruxton. You will have a great time. There'll be a lot of good cars. But at the same time, it is still a test. There's no hard racing going on, and you know the casual fan isn't going to buy a ticket just to go down there. So yeah, sure, I'll admit there isn't a lot of viewing, but at the same time, there doesn't need to be an exceptional amount of viewing for what is essentially a test day. I will say though, I'm very intrigued and perhaps impressed at the BTCC for doing effectively the opposite thing of what Formula One does going into a new era, because we've seen probably a lot of people have probably seen that the first test last week at Barcelona had no fans, no one's allowed there. You know, they had basically no lap times recorded other than privatized laps, and the BTCC has done completely the opposite. They've opened it up. They've said, right, here's a media day, here's fan tickets, come along, and as you mentioned, they're doing it at the circuit that can kill the cars the easiest. You know, if there's any circuit you don't want to bring your absolute brand spanking new front wheel drive or rear wheel drive car to, it's Thruxton. But at the same time, though, perhaps this is the best way to introduce the cars, because if you're a new team and you don't know where your limits are, take it to Thruxton. You will very quickly find your limits. There will probably be a lot of cars blowing up during that media day. I'm guaranteeing that. But at the same time, though, a lot of the teams will thoroughly need that data, because otherwise, if you took it round, I don't know, Brands Hatch Indy, on a very slow circuit, very narrow, with a lot of, less severe braking zones, let's say, then it's not going to push the car to its limit. It's not going to show you where the car could break down. And I think the one thing BTCC doesn't want as a marketing perspective is to have these cars arrive at the first race of the season, second race of the season, and because none of the teams know where the limits are, the cars just blow up. And so you ruin the racing. So you might as well ruin the test day before you get to any of the proper racing later in the year.
Yeah, I can see your point there, and that is a very good point. It will be interesting to see how these cars will do at testing, because obviously they've gone out and tested around Silverstone, but also it's a huge opportunity for Thruxton, because Thruxton isn't like Silverstone. It's not like Brands Hatch. Thruxton doesn't hold that many race events. And I would say BTCC is by a long way its biggest event of the year. So to hold the BTCC, not only 2 race weekends, but a media day as well, this will be huge for Thruxton's future. Connor?
Yes, and I think it's a big show of how the BARC is really continuing its stranglehold on the BTCC. And I know that probably sounds quite pointy of me. That's not meant to be like that at all. But when you've got a series of prestigious as touring cars, and you've got a circuit that the BARC owns, you might as well utilize it. And a lot of the teams are based in the middle of the show or down south, and I'm sure there are other reasons. I know, MSV prices may be up, for example, and obviously with circuits, becoming very centralized in their control nowadays, it's probably nice for touring cars to not be able to, travel up and down the country and have a solid base for them. And if Thruxton is that solid base, then that's where they'll base themselves. It's not like any of the teams are based too far from there anyway.
Yeah, and just a final point, and it's probably one that a lot of people would have picked up on. We're seeing all these driver launches. We haven't seen one from BTC Racing yet. 13th of April is just over a month away. There are 4 seats available at BTC Racing. If they haven't confirmed any drivers, they're a team that has been seen testing, but no one knows who's testing the car. Surely this is not the best for them. Surely you should be starting to announce your driver lineup so you can get focused. Or Mike, would you say they already have their drivers all set and it is just they're keeping out of the media, getting on with their own thing, and it's just gonna be like media day, here we are, we've been testing all winter, we knew who our drivers were from January, here we are, and we're going to take you down, and you are going to underestimate us?
Yeah, there's a few names that I'd be very surprised not to see in that car next year, the obvious ones. And I'm sure they must have that sorted. It's too late for them not to have a concrete idea of what they're doing. And unless the only reason I can think that for any sort of real tumultuous goings on there is if the team has had some sort of financial peril that they haven't disclosed that has meant that they can't necessarily go with their established fast drivers who, may or may not have been in the car already. And they've had instead to look for other financial options. But I don't think you take on 4 TBLs unless you're financially secure. I think BTC are far more sorted than it would seem, from the outside, for them not to have announced their drivers. I'm sure it's all in place.
Yeah, because as well as their 3 cars from last year, they have actually taken on one of Team Dynamics' cars from last year, because Team Dynamics has obviously got a whole new batch of Hondas. So that's where that's come from. And, it will be, as you said, you sort of hope that they're testing, the drivers all know who they are. They've just been told not to say who they are. Even though you'd expect Josh Cook would be in there somewhere, Senna Proctor you'd expect to be in there somewhere, I'd expect Jade Edwards to be in there somewhere, and then a 4th driver, whether it be a mini challenge driver coming up, Jeanette Junior driver coming up, or whether it would be another touring car driver coming out of nowhere. Who knows? Jason Plato might turn up in Honda, which will really throw everything we've just said completely out the window.
Well, it is a Honda.
Yeah, and that would be interesting, wouldn't it? Neil versus Plato, both driving Team Dynamics built Hondas. That would be very interesting. But we'll move on from obviously touring car talk for today. Bring in Andy Lloyd, because Peugeot have announced some very, I would say, sad news for Le Mans fans.
Oh, yes, I mean, the news that's been announced is that they've decided against competing at Spa, and they would have had to compete at Spa to get an entry into Le Mans. So that means that they will not be racing at Le Mans. And the reason they've given is that they need more time to test at their own pace for speed and reliability. The challenge that anybody entering Le Mans Hypercar is the fact that once your car is homologated, that homologation is frozen through to 2025. So if you rush this, and for whatever reason you've got a mistake somewhere, that is your 23, 24 and potentially 25 season gone. So I completely understand why they've done it. It is a shame, because I'm sure, everybody was looking forward to seeing the 9X8 out on circuit. But it is kind of understandable, bearing in mind what is at stake if you rush to get the car in. Their technical director, Olivier Jansony, basically said the demands to get a car to Le Mans are huge. If we're going to race at Spa as well, that leaves us little time for sort of development testing. And then after that, we're locked in, we're homologated, and that's it. So a great shame, probably inevitable, bearing in mind what is at stake. But we look forward to seeing that car out on track later this season.
Yeah, because obviously this means that once again there will not be a French car winning outright at Le Mans. We know the Alpine will not do it unless something seriously happens to the Toyotas and the Glickenhaus. Because once again, Alpine, until they complete their LMD8 program, they're still racing that grandfather sort of LMP1 car. So obviously the passionate French fans, they'll have to look to LMP2 or individual drivers to cheer on rather than an actual outright team win.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other issue that has sadly kind of, obviously the situation in Ukraine is tragic beyond belief, and there's no words to express that, the horror that I'm sure we all feel when we watch that. Of course, there is Russian interest in sports car racing. And I'm sure, the direction the suggestion has come from Ukraine that anybody connected with Russia or Russian funding should be banned from all FIA competition. So the entry list for Le Mans was due to be announced this Monday just gone. It has been postponed, while I guess the FIA, very carefully think what their response is going to be. The G-Drive racing effort, which is run by Algarve Pro, G-Drive is a brand of Gazprom, the largest Russian oil company, that I believe is, involved in the whole sanctions issue. So it's a very difficult time for the FIA right now to work out, what is best for, in terms of what's going on politically around the world, and also what's best for the sport. So, we may find out later this week where that is going.
Yeah, and it's not a great time because there's not that long until the season launch at Sebring. And obviously, as you said, with G-Drive, who are an LMP2 sort of heavy hitter, who you'd expect would be battling for the outright LMP2 win, to then obviously be involved with, because of Russian sanctions and all this sort of thing, would then maybe have to be removed. You've then obviously got the issue of, do you fill that spot with another team? Do you leave that spot short and have just one less driver? It's all of this that's got to be sorted. And it's only, 3.5, 4 weeks until Sebring?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's plenty of people on the reserve list, I'm sure, for LMP2 entries, but it's, let's not get into the politics of it. Clearly there's an awful lot of people involved. There's an awful lot of different interests involved. It's desperately sad for everybody involved in that situation. So I wouldn't want to go down the political side, but clearly the FIA have got some difficult decisions to make in the next few days.
Definitely. And Mike, I don't know whether you saw the Aston Martin Formula One launch, but this has caused a bit of a crackling in sports car racing because Stroll has mentioned his dream of taking part in sports car racing. The Aston Martin Valkyrie was at the F1 launch. Everyone's talking about it. How much would you want to see Aston Martin compete in outright competition in Le Mans?
Oh, absolutely. It's it's one of those great British brands that's got that history that I think we all want to see back at the top. And I was really hoping, to be honest, that was going to be not necessarily exclusively Aston Martin, but I was hoping that the hypercar category was going to see the return of all the big brands to Le Mans and something a bit more like the like what I personally would call the glory years in the 60s and 70s, where every sports car manufacturer in Europe was thinking, I'll give that a crack. And I don't think it's quite there yet, but I'm hoping that it becomes more enticing. The state of world politics at the moment isn't helping anyone. We'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, Connor, is this just Stroll basically trying to take a little dig at Ferrari, who've already said they're taking part in Le Mans in 2023 as part of that program? And there's no real thing. They're just saying to Ferrari, you haven't dealt with us at Formula One. We'll have a deal with you where you reign supreme. Or do you think this is genuinely like his way of basically going, you know what? I want to do that.
I mean, the idea of a British sports car company trying to dig it at Ferrari during Formula One times is certainly not unheard of, as I think many people might remember the Jaguar escapades back in the early 2000s when Ford tried to use that as a vehicle to call the Jaguar team the British Ferrari. And as much as I love Eddie Irvine and Mark Webber, I don't think their times at the team really justified that. Moniker. Saying that, I'm sure Lawrence Stroll knows what he's talking about. He has said in discussions with doing a Le Mans drive, which to me sounds like something was said and he's just feeling the water out to see whether any sponsors might be interested. But in terms of anything for 2022, absolutely not. In terms of anything for 2023, it feels a little early to suggest that at the minute. I think Stroll has to get his finances in order for the rest of the Aston Martin automotive brand, but he is well on his way to doing that at the minute. So who knows? Perhaps as the F1 team gets more involved in the aerodynamic side and less involved in the engine side, because there's an engine freeze from next year, there will be space for the engine development team to perhaps move on to other projects, such as maybe a mid-engine sports car. But we will see.
I mean, Andy, do you know any more about the Aston Martin rumours that have obviously been going around for a number of years now, since the Valkyrie was actually launched, but have recently seriously got quite a lot of steam behind them?
Do I know anything? No, I don't. I'm not privy to discussions in the boardroom. I would be absolutely astonished if Aston Martin seriously went down a top-level sports car program right now. They need Aston Martin to start making some serious money. They need to start repaying their shareholders. They need to see the success of the Formula One team. They've already got a GT3. Well, they cancelled their Works GT teams. They're supporting GTE and GT3 racing. You would have thought that would be enough challenges right now for that particular company. But Lawrence Stroll is a formidable character, and maybe he's decided it's another way to get the Aston Martin brand out in an automotive in an automotive market. He was very critical of where the previous management of Aston Martin had taken the company, and they were doing licensing deals on crazy things like apartment developments in Florida and, you know, stuff like that really has little or no place in a car manufacturer. And so maybe he sees this is another asset that I could potentially leverage, but I would be very surprised indeed.
I mean, the thing is, the cars are built. Like, they've been photographed, they've been on the track. The cars look like they're there. They just need that backing to get from on the track to a competitive racing level and racing in the LMD8 series, which we know Porsche, Ferrari, and many more manufacturers probably yet to come, as well as Acura and Cadillac coming in next year. So, you know, it's going to be a very packed grid. Aston probably want to be a part of that because that's where they can see that going. They haven't had Le Mans win since 1959. I mean, as I said, with the cars there, I'm sure they're probably looking at it going, well, what's the point in them just sitting in the factory when we could take even just one into racing? And maybe that's where Stroll coming in, as he might be I don't know. But as I said, I saw the room the other day, and it's getting quite. There's a lot of people saying that 2023 is where Aston Martin see themselves coming in. I personally don't see it. I think that is just rumours because they saw the car. But let's face it, an Aston Martin Valkyrie, which sounds incredible anyway, taking part in Le Mans, you know, perfect. We're going to end the news bit because, Andy, ELMS have removed Hungaroring and instead included a double header at the Palace of Speed, which I think is incredible. Do you want to shed some more light onto that?
I wish I could, to be honest. I saw this story break a couple of days ago. I really am not aware of. I looked at some of the news articles that came out. Whether there's some kind of, whether it's COVID related or whether it's some kind of political issue as to why they don't want to go to Hungary, I don't know. Monza is a fantastic circuit. It's not a circuit that many of the teams like going to because security there is very bad and theft is a constant problem, whether you're a spectator, a journalist, a photographer, or you're running a team. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful circuit. The racing is always spectacular. It'll be great to see them racing there twice during the season. But I should be interested to see, you know, later in the year, whether the Hungaroring comes back onto the calendar for 2023.
Yeah, it did. It sort of came out of nowhere, really. It just all I said, it just literally popped up and said ELMS has removed Hungaroring. So maybe the civil war in Ukraine, they're thinking Hungary is a bit close to it. I don't know.
Maybe they're in a bit cautious. It's probably something more financial. I can't imagine anything like that far to the west of the country would be that, you know, would affect it that much.
I mean, to be honest, if I had the choice, Monza would be my choice over Hungaroring, purely because of the overtaking possibilities. You know, you can overtake almost anywhere in Monza. And also, it's great for the fans because you're seeing these cars going around at 180, 190 mile an hour, you know, then hitting the brakes for the chicanes, which always causes a lot of chaos, and then it accelerates again. And obviously, you're in Italy, so it's incredibly passionate. The fans there are just insane anyway. We're out of COVID now. It's gone. No more talk about it.
Calm down, Josh.
Right. So fans will be there, you know, it'll be full spectacle. And a double header at Monza is just an incredible opportunity, an incredible fortnight for both the teams, fans, everyone. So that's something to really look forward to. We're going to end though with a question, which is, Andy, who would you say is the best AM driver in the world? I know we asked this on social media early on, but I'll ask you.
I think you could talk for about 2 hours on this subject. I think it all depends on the context of where you class an amateur driver, whether you're talking about the contemporary breed of amateur racing drivers or whether you're looking at the history of motorsport and picking out an amateur driver from there. I mean, certainly if you're looking at the current generation, I think there are probably two that always astonish me. One is Francois Perotto. He's won the GTAm title with AF Corsa in 2016, 1920, and again last year. He's taken class wins at Spa, Monza, Le Mans, and at the same time, he's a businessman and a chairman of an oil and gas company started by his family. So he's not only an excellent businessman, he's also a very experienced, very successful and very consistent racer. If you look at our domestic grid, Ian Logie, very successful businessman, made his fortune in the packaging industry, started racing in 2013, been a stalwart of the British GT Championship since 2015. Switched to Ram Racing in 2019, really pushed hard last year, finished runner-up in the championship with Yelmer Berman. But for this season, he's putting in a lot of seat time ahead of the season. He's got Jules Gounod, arguably one of the best GT drivers in the world, as his co-driver in British GT. So you've got, and he's a very nice guy, very engaging personality, extremely physically fit. Clearly does a lot of cycling, and focuses on his sport with great intensity. And he could well be the British GT champion this year. But I guess that when you're looking at amateur drivers, the story that I always come back to is that of Rob Walker, who ran his own Formula One team many, many years ago, heir to the Johnny Walker Scotch spirits business. But in 1939, I think one of the very first races he entered was the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And these were in the days when it was very much a gentleman's race. And when he got into the car for his evening stint, he chose a very tasteful dark blue pinstripe suit, which he believed was the correct attire for that time of the evening. And as the nights turned into morning, he changed into a more informal Prince of Wales check suit to continue his morning stint. And every time he called into the pit stop, his crew would fortify him with a glass of champagne as they refueled his car. And that, to me, is the absolute epitome of the ultimate gentleman driver.
If only that was the case for you, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too big on champagne, but I'd certainly take a pint or two when I'm in the pits. That wouldn't hurt.
So I'll ask the same question to you, Mike, and you sort of can't say yourself. Who would you say is, in your eyes, the best sort of amateur driver sort of thing? Well,
I am going to cheekily take advantage of that loose amateur definition to beat the club racing gong yet again, because there is the misconception that the cream will rise to the top, that someone who is talented enough will find themselves climbing the ranks, and motorsport is not a fair business, and that's not the way it works. And some of the most talented drivers I've ever seen and had the privilege of sharing tarmac with are not ever going to get a drive in anything serious. They are going to be funding their own racing for as long as they can. It's just the cruelty of motorsport. It's the way the game is. So we've raced. The British touring car drivers do come and do a bit of club racing, and I've raced with people who don't upset themselves against the likes of Jake Hill, Andrew Jordan. I've raced with, and I'm not allowed to say me, so I can't say me. But yeah, there are guys around who don't look out of place racing against these professional drivers. So to reel off a few who I've always found really impressive, there's Dave Griffin, Gary Preble, and me.
And it's true, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it's true, isn't it, Mike, that you get in club racing, you find there are drivers who've raced in the same championship and sometime with the same car for many, many years and seasons. And you think, wow, they've become real experts in that car, that championship, and the circuits they drive on. And they are excellent drivers, but in that championship.
Yeah, it's I think it's the dilemma we're all faced with. Is you can make yourself successful, and then you've got to. Everyone scratches their head at some point and says, right, how do I make this commercial? How do I make this start working for me to go forwards? And the path is not that clear. So you can have drivers who are probably above their station in where they're racing. They are really genuinely talented, but they will sort of fester a little because they just can't afford to go any further. So you do end up with specialists because that's where their budget level is comfortable. And sometimes people, if they're winning, just don't want to change it, don't want to go anywhere.
Yeah, and the same to you, Connor. Then, who would you say in your view, the best AM driver?
I think Andy has kind of already said what I wanted to say, which was on the national front, certainly someone like Ian Logie, I've consistently been impressed with for many, many years. In terms of what Mike was saying about, drivers who perhaps do this for a bit of fun but don't look out of place next to the professional drivers, I've seen a couple sort of step up in recent years and really impress more than what I thought they would. I know when I was observing a TCR championship a couple of years back, I was thoroughly impressed last year with how Bruce Winfield went from basically Honda Civic, driving very low powered Honda Civics, to driving a more powerful TCR car, and he finished runner up in his first season, and no one expected that other than the people deeply involved in his line of work. But if we are going to say a proper AM driver though for this, I've got to say on the international stage, Paul Dallalana, consistently one of the front running drivers in GTAm on the Le Mans series, and he's been running for years now. He's a staple of the grid there, and I'm sure he's probably not as peak fitness as perhaps some of his contemporaries, but I'll say that for consistency, Dallalana continues to be one of the best amateur drivers in the world.
Good choice. And then for me, I'm going to go pretty much simply in the club racing. There's one driver that stands out for me, and that's Stuart Oliver, who drives in the British Truck Championship. He's won, I think he's won 7 championships in that series, but he has tried his hand at touring cars, and he was competitive. It seems everything he's in, he's competitive. But you put him in a truck which shouldn't be competitive because it's, nearly 20 tons. And the races I've seen of him, he just drives away. He seems to be going 2 seconds quicker than anyone else in the grid. And that's quite impressive in something that is basically the same as everyone else. So, and then for a bit more of the big sports car front, Kelvin Fletcher, for me, I've always supported. And I've always rated very highly. He was in the British GT with the Bentleys. Don't forget, this guy started off in life on the streets of Corrie, shouting at people with a North accent. Oh, Emmerdale, sorry. Same sort of thing. And then he's gone into driving British GT, which is one of the top sports car series in the world, let alone in the UK. So, he's done really well, and obviously we hope he does keep doing really well. But that will be all. Thank you to Connor, Andy, and of course Mike for taking up his time talking to us and giving us some insight into not only his championship, but from a racer's point of view on other topics. It's been brilliant talking to you. By all means, like and subscribe, share us, talk about us, give us hashtags, everything. We want to be like Tiff Needell. We want to be like Martin Brundle, known all around the world. We want to be as big as Sky F1 is. That's our aspiration by the end of the year. So by all means, give us everything. I want to be a celebrity. Give us everything. Right. But been great talking, and we'll see you next week.
This is Motorsport Radio. 1, 2, 3. Join the conversation. Contact the show on Twitter, on Facebook, and on our website, Motorsport Radio.